Well, good morning. This is John Lucas. I'm going to try to show you a few tricks that I've learned on sharpening to try to speed things up a little bit and make life a little easier for you. The first thing you do, of course, is you have a V-block. So this is the one-way system, and I use the one-way wolverine jig. One-way wolverine jig goes in the V-block a certain distance. Now the problem is if the wheel wears, or every time you adjust this, you have to reset it. I read Mark Darlow's book and he suggested you make a little jig. And what I do is I set a piece of plywood up there and I draw an arc, and then I simply cut it out and cut away a little bit of waste in the area, and this is set up for my bowl gouge. Now I made some to go with different tools so that the wheel is always set the same. The advantage of this system is that even if my wheel wears, or if I have to readjust it, or if I use someone else's grinder, it's always the same. Set this distance here. I set it to 2 inches, but it could be set anywhere from 1 3/4 on up. It doesn't really matter that much. What matters is being very consistent at the distance. Once it's set, you simply turn the grinder on and you just very lightly make a pass all the way around the tool. Now if for some reason the angles don't look real straight, you grind away a little more metal in that area. If it's got a dip, you try to stay away from that area. Now what I found was when I go to sharpen my detail gouges is I had to put in a different thing and readjust my bar each time, and that was kind of a hassle. So what I came up with is this idea. I put a little block in there and I carved a little. What this does is raises my tool, my wolverine jig, up so that it grinds a sharper angle. I like my spindle gouges ground to about 35 degrees, and I have my bowl gouge ground to about 50 degrees. So this gives me a consistent grind, and I don't ever have to move my wheel. Now what I typically do to get this secondary bevel is I simply move it forward in the notch and grind it away, and that gives me the secondary bevel. It's pretty easy to make your own. All you need is a little sliding block that has a V-block. It could be made out of wood, it could be sliding in whichever direction. And I've made my own version of the wolverine jig years ago. It's kind of a halfway between the wolverine and the Ellsworth jig. It's just a piece of strapping metal that was bent and drilled. It's kind of springy. And of course I put a little knob in the top with an eyeball. And this bar, the bar is about 45 to 50 degrees. It's not real critical. It's more critical that it's consistent. You'll notice this one has an adjustment on it. I've actually drilled it and put a pin in there, so this one's never adjusted. I haven't adjusted it in years. On the other side of my grinder, I have the flat table. Now mine's a little different. I milled out an opening in it, but you don't have to have that. That's for a special purpose. What I made is another little gauge that sits on a table, and again lets me set the wheel to the same height, even and the same angle, even if the wheel is adjusted. The grind I'm going to show you now is the Stewart Batty Grind. It's very similar to what's used on a lot of traditional gouges. Instead of having the long swept back wings like this, it's more traditional shaped in that the wings are fairly short. The way I grind this is you set the tool at 45 degrees. I've got marks here and marks here. And this is 45 degrees. You start with the flute pointing to the left, and I simply rotate it around so the flute's pointing up. Then I start at this side, put my grind on, and rotate it around until it starts up. So put the flute to the left, touch the tool. Again, you have to watch the edge. If the edge gets misshapen, you simply stay at that point longer or be lighter. And that's as fast as it is. You don't need the wolverine jig to do that grind. And again, I kind of grind away the secondary part just to give me a shorter bevel. And that's a more traditional grind. I call it the Stewart Batty Grind because his grind has a 45-degree cutting angle on the wings as well as the tip. So no matter how you rotate it, it cuts the same going through the bowl.